This is Thomas Keene. If you're hearing this, then the signal's reaching farther than I thought it would. I'm broadcasting from what used to be called Outpost 7, about 40 miles northeast of a place called Haven 9. It's just me up here in this old radio tower, 3 stories of rusted metal that sways when the wind picks up. I've been here 17 days now, living off canned food I found in a storage locker and water I collect from the condensation pipes. It's not much, but it's better than where I was. Let me tell you about the world outside. The collapse happened 7 years ago, though nobody really calls it that anymore. We just say before and after, and everyone knows what you mean. The land out here is scorched flat, stretches of cracked earth that goes on for miles with nothing but the skeletons of old highways cutting through it. The sky stays this permanent gray, like ash mixed with clouds, and at night you get these weird light storms that flicker across the horizon. Not lightning exactly, more like static electricity dancing in the air. Some people think it's leftover radiation or something from whatever caused all this. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. I came to Haven 9 8 months ago with my sister Hannah. We'd been traveling from up north where our previous settlement collapsed after their water supply got contaminated. Nearly died twice making that journey, once from dehydration and once when we got caught in a dust storm that lasted 3 days. When we finally saw those metal walls rising out of the wasteland, we thought we'd found salvation. 200 people living behind corrugated steel barriers, solar panels barely working but enough to keep some lights on. They had communal meals, work rotations, a system that seemed to function. Most importantly, they had the wardens keeping order. The wardens were 3 people who ran Haven 9, always wearing these old gas masks like the air was toxic, though it wasn't. Their leader was a man named Victor Rains, tall and calm, the kind of voice that made you want to trust him. He told us the rules when we first arrived, said they were for our protection, that everyone who survived this long did so by following them without question. And honestly, after months of nearly dying out there, we were ready to follow any rules they gave us. Hannah and I just wanted walls between us and the wasteland, a place to sleep without wondering if we'd wake up. The rules were painted on the western wall in faded red letters, 9 of them total, though the 9th one had been scraped off so you could only see the rust stains where it used to be. The first rule said never leave after the 2nd siren. Every evening at 8, this alarm would sound twice, and after that 2nd one, the gates locked and everyone stayed inside. No exceptions. The 2nd rule was don't touch the black rain. Every few nights, this oily precipitation would fall, thick and dark, and everyone would rush inside until it stopped. Rule 3, keep the radios off after midnight. Any communication devices had to be shut down by 12. Rule 4, never say your real name aloud. Everyone used nicknames or sometimes just numbers. Hannah became 7 and I was 15. Rule 5 said bury your dead before dawn. Anyone who died had to be taken to the graveyard outside the eastern wall and buried immediately. No ceremonies or goodbyes. Rule 6 was trade only through the fence, never face to face. When outsiders came to trade supplies, everything happened through wire mesh, no direct contact. Rule 7, burn all paper found outside the walls. Any documents or books from before had to be destroyed. Rule 8, do not answer the voices that sound like your loved ones. Sometimes at night you'd hear people calling from beyond the walls, voices that sounded familiar, but you were supposed to ignore them completely. And Rule 9 was just gone, erased, only those rust stains proving something used to be written there. For the first few months, I didn't question any of it. I was grateful. We had food rationing, but at least there was food. We had repair duties, but at least we had shelter. Hannah seemed happy too at first, made friends with this guy named Isaac Ward, helped out in the supply inventory. Life had this rhythm to it. Boring maybe, but stable, and after years of chaos that felt like enough. But then Hannah started noticing things, little things at first, like how the wardens never actually explained why we followed these rules, just that we had to. She'd ask questions during meals, casual ones, like why couldn't we use our real names, or what was actually dangerous about the black rain. People would get uncomfortable when she asked, not angry exactly, more like nervous, like she was breaking some unspoken agreement we'd all made. The wardens would just say the rules kept us alive, and that was all we needed to know. But Hannah kept pushing, kept asking, and I could see Victor Raines watching her during the evening counts, this look on his face I couldn't quite read. I told her to let it go, that we had it good here, that questioning things would just cause problems. She said that's exactly why she needed to question them, because everyone being too scared to ask was worse than any answer we might get. 3 months ago, something happened that should have woken me up, but didn't. A trader named Jonah Mercer showed up at the fence just after the second siren. He was banging on the gate, begging to be let in, said he'd gotten delayed and just needed shelter for the night. The wardens told him no, said he'd have to wait until morning, that the rules were clear. I was on night watch that evening, up on the catwalk, and I heard everything. Jonah started screaming around midnight, not like something was attacking him, but like he was terrified of something he could see that we couldn't. He screamed for hours, this raw, desperate sound that made everyone cover their ears and try to sleep through it. By dawn, when they opened the gates, Jonah was gone. Just his backpack sitting there in the dirt, supplies still inside. Nobody talked about it. When someone finally asked Victor Raines what happened, he just said Jonah broke the rules, and that was that. I remember Hannah staring at that empty space where the backpack had been, this look on her face like she was putting pieces together. I should have paid attention then. I should have listened when she started telling me her theories, but I was too comfortable, too grateful for the walls and the food to want to rock the boat. 2 months ago, Hannah told me she'd been keeping notes, documenting things she'd noticed. She said 17 people had vanished from Haven 9 since we arrived, just disappeared with no explanation. Some had asked too many questions, some had tried to break small rules, and they were just gone. A woman named Clara Dean questioned why we burned paper, vanished 3 days later. A guy called Derek Miles tried to keep his radio on past midnight, disappeared within a week. A teenager named Riley Hart insisted on using his real name, gone 2 days after that. Hannah said the pattern was clear, that people who questioned the system were being removed, and she didn't think they were just being kicked out into the wasteland. I didn't want to believe her. I told her she was seeing patterns where there weren't any, that people left colonies all the time, that maybe they just decided to move on. But Hannah had this way of looking at me when she knew I was lying to myself, and that look told me she wasn't going to let this go. She said she was going to prove the rules weren't about protection. They were about something else, something darker. I begged her to stop, told her it didn't matter as long as we were safe. But she said safety that costs your freedom to think isn't really safety at all. 4 weeks ago, Hannah disappeared. She didn't come to dinner and her bunk was empty. I searched everywhere, asked everyone, And finally, the wardens told me she'd violated protocol and been removed for the safety of the colony. I demanded to know what that meant, where she was, if she was alive. Victor Raines looked at me with those eyes behind the gas mask and said I should be careful not to follow my sister's path, that Haven 9 only worked if everyone followed the rules without exception. That's when I knew. That's when I finally understood what Hannah had been trying to tell me. I found her notebook that night, hidden under her mattress. Page after page of observations, dates, names, patterns. She'd been documenting everything, and what I read there made my blood cold. She'd discovered things about the rules, about what they really meant, about what Haven 9 actually was. The last entry was dated 3 days before she vanished. It just said she'd found proof and she was going to confront the wardens. That was it. That was the last thing my sister ever wrote. I made my decision that night. I packed everything I could carry, waited until just after the second siren, and I ran. I broke Rule 1 and I didn't look back. I ran through the darkness with my heart hammering, expecting to hear voices chasing me, or alarms, or gunfire, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the cracked earth and the wind across the wasteland. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Then I walked, then I crawled, and somehow I made it here to this tower. I've been going through Hannah's notebook every day since I arrived, trying to understand what she discovered, trying to find some clue about where they took her. I'm going to find out what Haven 9 really is. I'm going to find out what those rules are actually hiding. And I'm going to find my sister, or at least find out what happened to her. If you're out there in another colony, another settlement with rules nobody explains, start paying attention. Start asking questions. Because I think Haven 9 isn't the only place like this. I think whatever's happening there is happening in a lot of other places too. This is Thomas Keene, day 18 at Outpost 7. The wind's been bad today, howling through the gaps in the metal, making the whole structure groan like it's going to come apart. I've been rationing what I have left, maybe 2 weeks of food if I'm careful, and the water collection system is working, but barely. I've had a lot of time to think up here, a lot of time to go through Hannah's notebook over and over again, and I'm starting to see things I missed the first time. Things that make me realize how blind I was back at Haven 9. Hannah was smart about how she documented everything. She didn't just write down what happened. She tracked patterns, made connections, asked questions in the margins. The notebook starts about 6 weeks before she disappeared, right around the time she told me she was going to investigate the rules. The first few pages are just observations, small things most people wouldn't notice. She wrote about how the wardens always did their rounds at the same times, how they never ate with the rest of us, how they'd have these quiet conversations by the eastern wall that would stop the moment anyone got close. Then she started tracking the disappearances. She made a list, 17 names total over the 8 months we'd been there. Next to each name, she wrote what they'd done before vanishing. Clara Dean asked why we had to burn paper from the old world, gone 3 days later. Derek Miles kept his radio on past midnight, trying to pick up signals from other settlements, disappeared within the week. Riley Hart, just a kid really, maybe 19, refused to use a nickname and kept saying his real name during roll call, vanished 2 days after the wardens warned him. The pattern was obvious once you saw it written out like that. Question the rules, break the rules, even talk about the rules too much, and you were gone. But Hannah didn't stop there. She started testing the rules herself, carefully, quietly. Rule 2 said, don't touch the black rain, and everyone treated it like it was acid or poison or something that would melt your skin off. Hannah didn't buy it. She wrote about how she watched the rain fall one night, how it pooled in the courtyard, and how in the morning it was just gone, evaporated, or soaked into the ground. So she did an experiment. She found an old glass jar, sealed it up, and the next time the black rain fell, she collected some while everyone else was hiding inside. I found that jar and her belongings after she vanished. The contents were still there, and I opened it expecting something horrible, but it was just water. Dark water, yeah, mixed with ash and oil residue, but not toxic, not dangerous. Hannah had even written a note tucked under the jar saying she'd tested it, let drops of it sit on her skin, and nothing happened. The black rain wasn't protecting us from anything. It was just rain. Rule 2 was a lie, or at least an exaggeration, and that made Hannah wonder what else was a lie. She started looking at Rule 5 next. Bury your dead before dawn. It seemed reasonable on the surface, like a hygiene thing, or maybe to prevent disease, but Hannah noticed something strange. In 8 months at Haven 9, only 3 people had officially died. 1 old man from what they said was a heart attack, 1 woman from an infection, and 1 guy from an accident during repairs. 3 deaths in a colony of 200 people over 8 months seemed low, especially given how hard life was. But what really bothered Hannah was that she'd counted 17 disappearances. So where were the other 14 bodies? She volunteered for burial detail, which nobody ever wanted to do because it meant going outside the walls before dawn. I thought she was crazy at the time, but she had a reason. She wanted to see the graveyard, wanted to check something. Her notes from that morning are brief but chilling. She wrote that the graveyard had maybe 40 or 50 mounds, all unmarked, all roughly the same size. But when she was supposed to be digging a new grave, she carefully checked one of the older ones. The grave was shallow, too shallow for a body, and when she dug down just a bit with her hands, she found clothes, a belt, a pair of boots, but no body, no bones, nothing. Hannah's theory was written in the margins in her handwriting, getting faster, messier, like she was scared or excited or both. What if nobody's actually dying? What if the graves are just for show? What if the people who disappear are being taken somewhere instead? She drew a line connecting that thought to another note about Rule 1, about how nobody could leave after the second siren. She'd been on night watch once, up on the catwalk like I was the night Jonah Mercer disappeared, and she'd seen something around 3 in the morning. Trucks. 2 of them, coming from outside, pulling up to the southern gate that nobody ever used. The wardens opened it, and she watched them load something into the trucks. She couldn't see what, too dark and too far away, but the trucks left before dawn, and she never reported seeing them because she knew it would sound like she was making trouble. But the thing that really broke everything open, the thing that made me understand why Hannah had to run or confront them, was the recording. Hannah had this tiny audio recorder she'd kept hidden in her jacket, something from before the collapse that still worked. 3 days before she disappeared, she broke Rule 3. She kept the recorder on after midnight, hid it near the warden's quarters, and let it run for 4 hours. I found it with her notebook, and I've listened to it maybe 30 times now. At first it's just silence, wind, the usual sounds of the colony at night. Then around 2 in the morning, voices. Victor Raines was talking to someone, and in the recording you can hear him clearly because he didn't have the gas mask on. His voice was different than during the day, more casual, more relaxed. He was talking about shipments and schedules and processing. He mentioned numbers, how many people were ready, how many still needed more conditioning. Then he said something that made my hands shake when I first heard it. He said the current group was nearly complete. 23 subjects who'd stopped asking questions, who followed every rule without hesitation, who'd been observed long enough to confirm they were compliant. He talked about transport schedules and delivery windows like he was discussing cargo. The other voice, whoever he was talking to, was harder to hear, but I caught pieces of it. Something about quotas, about other sites running behind schedule, about how Haven 9 was one of the better performing collection points. Collection points, not settlements, not refuges. Collection points. Like we were things being gathered up for some purpose. The recording cuts off after that because the battery died, but it was enough. Hannah had her proof. Haven 9 wasn't protecting us. It was preparing us for something. I remember the morning after Hannah played me that recording. We were sitting in the storage area where she'd hidden all her evidence, and she looked at me with this intensity I'd never seen before. She told me everything she'd figured out. The rules weren't about survival, they were about control. Rule 1 kept us locked in so we couldn't see the nighttime transports. Rule 2 kept us scared and inside during weather that was actually harmless. Rule 3 prevented us from hearing communications between the wardens and whoever they reported to. Rule 4 stripped away our identities, made us numbers instead of people. Rule 5 hid the fact that people weren't dying, they were being taken. Rule 6 prevented us from forming connections with outsiders who might help. Rule 7 destroyed evidence from before the collapse that might contradict what we were being told. Rule 8 isolated anyone who escaped and tried to come back. Hannah said she was going to confront Victor Rains. She was going to demand answers, demand to know where the disappeared people went, demand to see real proof that we were being protected rather than imprisoned. I begged her not to. I told her we could just leave, we could run like I eventually did, but she said if we ran without exposing the truth, then everyone else would still be trapped. She wanted to save them. She wanted to make the wardens answer for what they were doing. I told her it was suicide, that they'd make her disappear too. But she said somebody had to stand up. Somebody had to refuse to be afraid. 4 days later, Hannah didn't show up for dinner. Her bunk was empty. Her things were gone, except for the notebook and recorder she'd hidden where only I would know to look. When I asked where she was, the warden said she'd violated protocol. When I demanded details, Victor Rains pulled me aside and spoke quietly, calmly, like he was being reasonable. He said Haven 9 only worked because everyone followed the rules, that individuals who couldn't accept that structure became dangerous to the group, and that my sister had made her choices. Then he looked at me with those cold eyes and told me I seemed like a smart person who understood how things worked, and he hoped I wouldn't make the same mistakes Hannah did. That night I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to people around me sleeping peacefully, following the rules, not asking questions, and I felt sick. I felt complicit. I'd let them take my sister because I was too scared to act, too comfortable with walls and food to risk losing it. But then I thought about what Hannah would want me to do. She'd want me to finish what she started. She'd want me to find out where they took her, what Haven 9 really was, what all of this was really about. So I made my choice. I waited until just after the second siren, when everyone was locked in their quarters. I packed light, just water and food and Hannah's evidence. I went to the eastern gate, the one that led to the graveyard, and I found it wasn't locked. None of the gates were ever actually locked. That's when I understood something that made everything worse. We could have left any time. The rules, the fear, the structure, it was all just in our heads. We were prisoners who'd volunteered for ourselves. I ran into the Wasteland, and I didn't stop until my legs gave out. I kept expecting to hear alarms, to hear wardens chasing me, to hear gunfire, but there was nothing. Just silence. Just the wind and the empty land and the distant flicker of those strange lights on the horizon. They didn't chase me because they didn't need to. They'd made us so afraid of the outside that most people would never even try to leave. And those who did, well, where would they go? What would they do? The wasteland was real enough. The danger was real enough. They'd built their prison without walls because they'd convinced us the world itself was the wall. I made it to this tower, and I've been here ever since, going through Hannah's work, trying to understand the full picture. I know Haven 9 is part of something bigger now. I know there are other sites, other colonies, other places doing the same thing. I know people are being taken somewhere for some purpose I don't understand yet. And I know my sister is out there somewhere, either still alive or already gone, and I'm going to find out which. I'm going to find the truth about what happened to her, about what's happening to all of us. This is Thomas Keene, still broadcasting, still searching for answers. If you're in a colony with rules you don't understand, look closer, pay attention, because the prison isn't always made of walls. This is Thomas Keene, day 24 at Outpost 7. I need to tell you about what I found out here, because the wasteland isn't what they told us it was. I've been exploring the area around this tower, moving in wider circles each day, and there are signs of people everywhere. Recent signs. Footprints in the dust that haven't been blown away yet, campsites with ashes that are still warm, supply caches hidden in the ruins. The wardens told us the wasteland was empty except for the colonies, that everyone who wasn't behind walls was dead. That was another lie. 3 days ago, I found something that changed everything. About 3 miles west of here, there's this old military convoy that crashed or got abandoned, hard to tell which. The vehicles are stripped down to nothing, anything useful taken long ago. But I started checking the cargo area of one of the trucks and found a metal case wedged under the frame. Waterproof, sealed tight, covered in rust, but intact. Inside were documents, actual paper files from before the collapse, dated 7 years ago, right when everything fell apart. Military reports, personnel records, communications logs. I spent an entire night reading through them by flashlight. The documents mention something called the Resettlement Initiative. From what I can piece together, it was a government program that started about a year before the collapse happened. The language is careful, lots of bureaucratic words that don't quite say what they mean, but you can read between the lines. They were planning for what they called a population management scenario, preparing facilities and protocols for what would happen after some kind of disaster. The thing is, reading these papers, it sounds like they knew the disaster was coming, not like they predicted it, more like they were counting on it. One of the documents is a personnel file, and when I saw the name on it, my stomach dropped. Victor Raines. His title was Liaison Officer for Post-Collapse Population Control. There's a photo attached, him in a suit standing in front of some government building, and it's definitely the same person. The file lists his assignment as coordinating between military assets and civilian resettlement centers. Resettlement centers. That's what they called them in the documents. Not colonies, not refuges. Resettlement centers, like they were moving people around, organizing them, processing them. I kept reading and found more mentions of the initiative. There were supposed to be multiple sites, each one set up to handle a certain number of people, each one with specific protocols for assessment and categorization. The documents talk about behavioral metrics and compliance testing and long-term integration. All these clinical terms that make people sound like products on an assembly line. And then there's this one memo that mentions how important it is to maintain population cooperation through structured environments. That's when I understood what the rules really were. They weren't safety measures. They were tests. Every single rule was designed to measure how well we'd follow orders without explanation. Rule 1 tested if we'd accept curfews without question. Rule 2 tested if we'd believe something was dangerous just because we were told it was. Rule 3 tested if we'd give up communication when ordered. Rule 4 tested if we'd surrender our own identities. Rule 5 tested if we'd accept death without verification. Rule 6 tested if we'd avoid contact with outsiders. Rule 7 tested if we'd destroy evidence that contradicted what we were told. Rule 8 tested if we'd ignore people trying to help us escape. Every rule was another layer of conditioning, another way to measure our obedience. But I still didn't know why. What was the point of all this testing? Where were they taking the people who passed? I needed more information, more pieces of the puzzle, and that's when I heard the voice. It was late, maybe 10 at night, and I was sitting in the tower going through the documents again when I heard someone calling out from below. A woman's voice, careful and quiet, asking if anyone was up there. My first thought was Rule 8, don't answer voices that sound familiar, but then I realized how crazy that was. I wasn't in Haven 9 anymore. The rules didn't apply out here. I called back, and this woman appeared at the base of the tower, thin and exhausted looking, carrying a backpack that had seen better days. She said her name was Nadia Pike, and she'd seen my light from a distance. She was cautious at first, didn't come up the ladder until I'd talked with her for a while, both of us feeling each other out, trying to figure out if we could trust each other. Eventually she climbed up and we sat in the tower room while she told me her story, and it was like listening to an echo of my own. Nadia had escaped from Haven 9 2 months before I did. She'd been there with her husband Aaron and their daughter Leah, a little girl maybe 8 years old. Aaron had started questioning the rules, specifically Rule 4 about not using real names. He thought it was dehumanizing, said people needed their identities to stay sane, and he kept pushing back against it during roll calls. The wardens warned him twice, and the third time they came to his quarters at night and told Nadia they were reassigning him to maintenance duty in another section. She never saw him again. When she asked where he was, they told her he was working on essential repairs and couldn't have visitors. After 2 weeks of getting the same answer, Nadia knew something was wrong. She tried to find him, searched every part of Haven 9 she could access, but Aaron was just gone. That's when she decided to run, to take Leah and get out before they disappeared too. They made it past the walls, made it almost 5 miles into the wasteland, but then a dust storm hit. Nadia lost her grip on Leah's hand in the chaos, couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything over the wind. When the storm cleared, her daughter was gone. She'd been searching ever since, checking every ruin, every shelter, every possible place an 8-year-old might have ended up. Hearing her story made something click in my head. Aaron Pike disappeared after questioning the rules, just like Hannah did. just like all those other people Hannah had tracked. We compared notes, shared what we knew, and Nadia told me something I hadn't considered. She said there had to be records somewhere, some kind of central location where the wardens kept their real information. She'd been following power lines when she could find them, trying to trace them back to a source, and about a week ago she'd found something. An underground bunker built into a ravine, hidden under camouflage netting and debris. She'd been too scared to go in alone, but with two of us, maybe we could risk it. We set out the next morning, following Nadia's directions south and east. It took most of the day, but we found it. The bunker entrance was barely visible, just a reinforced door set into the hillside, covered in rust but still solid. The door wasn't locked, which seemed wrong until we got inside and realized the place was old, probably abandoned since before the collapse. But when Nadia hit a switch near the entrance, lights flickered on. Backup power, still running after all these years. The bunker went down 2 levels, rooms full of old computer equipment and file cabinets and surveillance monitors. The computers were still running, their screens glowing in the darkness. We spent hours going through files, and what we found made everything worse. Haven 9 wasn't alone. There were 37 sites total, all of them marked on a digital map, all of them running the same program. Each site had a designation, a capacity number, and a status report. Haven 9 was listed as Site 09, capacity 200, status optimal. Other sites had different statuses. Some said delayed, some said compromised, a few said terminated. I didn't want to think about what terminated meant. The files called them collection sites. That phrase again, the same one from Hannah's recording. Each site was screening people, assessing them, sorting them. The documents used words like behavioral compliance and adaptation metrics and psychological conditioning. They were measuring us, testing how well we'd follow orders, how completely we'd accept authority, how thoroughly they could break down our independent thinking. And the people who passed all those tests, who followed every rule without question, who stopped asking why and just obeyed, they were being transported to somewhere called Site Prime. Site Prime was marked on the map about 200 miles west of Haven 9, deep into the wasteland where nobody would think to look. The files didn't say much about what Site Prime actually was, just that it was the central processing facility, the main hub where everything led. There were transport schedules showing regular pickups from all 37 collection sites, convoys moving at night when nobody would see them, delivering their cargo to Site Prime. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 3 years, they'd transported more than 4,000 people. Nadia found a file that made her start crying. It was a roster from Haven 9, a list of names and designation numbers and assessment scores. She found Aaron's name with a red mark next to it that said non-compliant, unsuitable for integration. Below that was a single word that made my blood run cold: disposed. Her husband hadn't been taken to Site Prime. He'd been disposed of, whatever that meant, because he wouldn't stop using his real name. I found Hannah's name on the roster too, also marked non-compliant, but her status was different. It said detained for behavioral correction. That word, detained, gave me the first hope I'd felt in weeks. Hannah might still be alive. If they were trying to correct her behavior instead of just disposing of her, maybe there was still time, but we had to move fast. The files showed transport schedules, and the next pickup from Haven 9 was in 6 days. If we were going to do anything, we needed to act now. I made a decision that might have been stupid, but felt necessary. The bunker had a long-range radio, much more powerful than the one in my tower. I could broadcast on every frequency, reach other settlements, warn people about what was happening. Nadia thought it was too risky, that it would give away our position, but I told her people deserved to know. If we stayed silent, all those other colonies would keep feeding people to Site Prime with no idea what was happening. So I sat down at that radio and I broadcast everything. I told them about Haven 9, about the rules and what they really meant, about the collection sites and Site Prime and the transports. I gave coordinates for safe zones we'd found marked on the map, places where people could go if they escaped. I warned them that settlements with strange, unexplained rules were probably part of the same system. I told them to run, to question everything, to not trust the people claiming to protect them. The moment I finished broadcasting, alarms started blaring through the bunker. Red lights flashing, a computerized voice announcing security breach. My transmission had been traced, tracked back to our location. Nadia grabbed what files she could carry, and we ran. We made it out of the bunker, just as we heard engines in the distance, vehicles approaching fast. We split up, agreed to meet at a rendezvous point 10 miles north, and disappeared into the ruins. I'm back at the tower now. Nadia arrived an hour ago. We watched from up here as trucks surrounded the bunker, wardens in their gas masks securing the site. They're looking for us, and they're gonna keep looking. But here's what I realized while we were running. They didn't want us to leave Haven 9 because we might warn others. They didn't want us asking questions because we might find answers. The whole system depends on people being too scared or too conditioned to fight back. Well, I'm done being scared. I know where Site Prime is now. I know that's where Hannah is being held. And I think I finally understand what the 9th rule said before they erased it. The rule they didn't want anyone to see because it would make everything too obvious. I think it said you are free to leave, but there is nowhere else to go. They erased it because it revealed the truth. We were always free to leave. The prison was in our minds, not in the walls. This is Thomas Keene, and I'm done running. I'm going to Site Prime. I'm going to find my sister, and I'm going to burn their whole operation to the ground. This is Thomas Keene, day 31. I'm transmitting from a drainage tunnel about 15 miles south of the bunker. Nadia's with me, and we haven't stopped moving for a week straight. They're hunting us, really hunting us now, and it's nothing like I expected. The wardens have drones with thermal scanners, vehicles that patrol in patterns, search parties that work in shifts. But here's the strange part. They're not trying to kill us. Every time we think we're trapped, every time they get close enough that we should be caught, there's always a way out. Always one route left open. It took me 3 days to realize what they're doing. They're hurting us. Every escape route leads southwest. Every time we run, we end up a little closer to Site Prime. They want us to go there. They want us to walk right into whatever's waiting. Nadia figured it out the same time I did, and we tried changing direction, tried heading north or east, but the patrols are thicker in those directions. South and west is always easier, always the path of least resistance. So we're stuck with a choice. Let them hurt us where they want, or stay out here forever with them, tracking our every move. Neither option is good. 4 days ago, hiding in an abandoned gas station, we met someone else. A man in his 40s, thin and weathered, with this look in his eyes like he'd seen things he couldn't forget. He had a rifle pointed at us when we came around a corner, and for a few seconds nobody moved. Then he lowered the gun and said he wasn't with the wardens, wasn't with anyone, had been running alone for months. His name was Owen Carter, and he'd escaped from a place called Sanctuary 14. Owen's story was like ours, but worse because he'd been running longer. Sanctuary 14 was another collection site, different name but same setup, same kind of rules, same kind of wardens, same disappearances. Owen had worked maintenance there, had access to areas most people didn't, and he'd seen things that made him run. He told us about rooms where they'd bring people for what they called conditioning sessions, places where the wardens would work on anyone who questioned the rules too much. Not torture exactly, more like breaking them down psychologically, making them compliant through isolation and fear and manipulation. What made Owen run was finding out the truth about the collapse. He'd gotten into a sealed section of Sanctuary 14, found files that weren't supposed to be accessible, and learned that the collapse wasn't natural. It wasn't war or climate or economic failure, or at least it wasn't just those things. It was orchestrated. There was a government project started years before everything fell apart called the Haven Protocol. The whole point was population management after a controlled societal reset. They saw the world heading toward chaos and decided to accelerate it so they could rebuild it exactly how they wanted. Owen said the people running the protocol believed the old world was too broken to fix, too many people thinking for themselves, too much resistance to centralized authority. So they engineered the collapse, let it burn through society like a wildfire, and then positioned themselves as saviors. They built the collection sites and called them refuges, set up the wardens and called them protectors, created the rules and called them safety measures. But the real purpose was screening. They were sorting through survivors, looking for people who could be conditioned into perfect compliance, who would follow orders without question, who would give up everything, including their own names, if someone in authority told them to. The people who passed the screening, who proved themselves compliant enough, got transported to Site Prime. The people who didn't pass, who kept questioning or resisting or thinking independently, they got disposed of. Owen had seen the disposal area at Sanctuary 14, a pit beyond the eastern wall where they dumped the bodies of anyone deemed unsuitable. He estimated hundreds of people over the years, maybe more. All of them guilty of nothing except refusing to stop being human. We spent that night in the gas station sharing information, and Owen added pieces to the puzzle we'd been building. He'd seen the original version of the 9th rule at Sanctuary 14, the one that got erased from most sites. It said, "Do not try to leave. There is nowhere else to go." They removed it because it was too obviously a prison rule, made the whole setup too clear. But every other rule reinforced the same message in subtle ways. The rules taught learned helplessness, convinced people that questioning authority was deadly, that independence was dangerous, that the only safety came from total obedience. Owen told us what he knew about Site Prime, and it wasn't much because even the wardens didn't talk about it openly. But from what he'd gathered, it wasn't a prison or a camp, it was a city. A functioning pre-collapse city that had been preserved or protected somehow, with power and water and infrastructure that still worked. The people running the protocol had saved one piece of the old world for themselves, and they were populating it with the most obedient survivors they could find. Not slaves exactly, more like a perfectly controlled population that would never resist, never question, never threaten the system. That's what made it so dark. They weren't just killing people or imprisoning them. They were sorting humanity into categories. The compliant got to live in comfort and safety in Site Prime. The non-compliant got disposed of or left to die in the Wasteland. It was selection, deliberate and calculated, designed to create a new world where everyone who remained had been trained to accept authority without question. A world where resistance had been screened out before it could ever begin. Nadia asked the question we were all thinking. If Site Prime was real, if people were actually living there, what happened to them? Owen said from what he'd pieced together, they lived normal lives. They had jobs and homes and routines. They got to raise families and feel safe and pretend the collapse never happened. But every aspect of their lives was monitored, assigned, controlled, and they accepted it because they'd been screened for exactly that quality. They were people who chose security over freedom every single time. We decided that night to stop running from the wardens and start running toward them. If they wanted to herd us to Site Prime, fine. We'd go there, but not as prisoners. We'd go armed with knowledge and evidence and determination. Owen had a plan. He knew of other refugees, people who'd escaped from various collection sites and were surviving out in the Wasteland. If we could gather them, if we could form a group, we'd have a better chance of getting inside Site Prime and finding out the full truth, finding the people who'd been taken, finding Hannah and Leah and Aaron and all the others. Over the next week, we made contact with 7 other survivors. Owen had been keeping track of them, watching their movements, knowing where they camped and traveled. One by one, we found them and convinced them to join us. There was Isaac Ward, Hannah's friend from Haven 9, who'd escaped a few days after I did. There was Claire Sutton, and her story shook me because she'd been a warden. She'd worked for them, enforced the rules, helped process people, and it took her 2 years to realize what she was really part of. When she finally understood, she couldn't live with it anymore and ran. Claire told us things about the system that even Owen didn't know. She described the evaluation process, how the wardens were trained to watch for specific behaviors, how they rated everyone on compliance scales, how they decided who got transported and who got disposed of. She said the wardens weren't monsters. Most of them genuinely believed they were helping rebuild civilization, creating order from chaos. They'd been told that the non-compliant people were dangerous, would undermine the new society, had to be removed for the greater good. It was easier to do terrible things when you convinced yourself they were necessary. Claire also told us that she'd been low level, had never seen the full picture, but she'd heard the higher-ranking wardens talk about Site Prime with this reverence like it was paradise. They described it as proof that the protocol worked, that humanity could be saved if you just removed the troublesome elements. She said the people running everything truly believed they were heroes, that they'd preserved civilization while the rest of the world burned. That somehow made it worse, knowing they thought they were right. We also found Travis Reed, a mechanic who'd kept vehicles running at his colony before escaping. He was the one who got our group mobile, jury-rigging old trucks and motorcycles from scavenged parts, making them run on biofuel and prayer. With transportation, we could cover distance faster, could actually make it to Site Prime before we died of exposure or starvation. The group of 10 of us began moving west together. We traveled at night when the drones were less active, hid during the day in ruins and tunnels, and anywhere we could find cover. The wardens knew we were coming. We saw their patrols watching us from a distance, but they didn't stop us. They wanted us to reach Site Prime. That should have been a bigger warning than it was. On day 38, we saw it. The sun was setting and we'd climbed to the top of a ridge to scout ahead, and there it was on the horizon. Massive walls, but not crude metal like Haven 9. Real walls, pre-collapse construction, concrete and steel that looked maintained. Lights everywhere, more lights than I'd seen since before the collapse. Street lights and building lights and searchlights on the walls. The silhouette of intact buildings rising behind the barriers, towers and structures that looked like they'd never been touched by the disaster that destroyed everything else. Site Prime was real. It wasn't a rumor or a lie or some kind of fever dream. It was a functioning city in the middle of the wasteland, and looking at it from that ridge, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just fear or anger, but this twisted kind of hope. Because if Site Prime was real, then maybe Hannah was really there. Maybe she was alive behind those walls. Maybe I could actually find her. I set up the radio for what I knew might be my last broadcast from outside. I told everyone listening what we'd found, where we were, what we were about to do. I told them that if they were in a colony with rules they didn't understand, they needed to question everything. I told them not to let fear make them prisoners, not to trade their freedom for the illusion of safety. I told them the same thing Hannah tried to tell people at Haven 9 before they took her. The most dangerous prison is the one you build in your own mind. Then I looked at the 9 people with me, this ragged group of refugees who'd all lost something to the protocol, who'd all chosen resistance over compliance, even when it meant losing everything. I thought about how the wardens had spent years screening people, removing anyone who wouldn't obey, building a population of followers. But they'd made a mistake. Every person they disposed of, every person they drove into the wasteland, every person who escaped and survived, we were the ones they'd screened out. We were the ones who wouldn't break. And now we were coming for them. The door is always open. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. This is Thomas Keene, day 40. I'm alive, and I'm inside Site Prime. Hannah is alive too. I found her. But nothing, absolutely nothing, is what I thought it would be. Let me tell you what happened, because people need to know what this place really is, what the protocol was really building toward. This is going to be my last transmission for a while, maybe my last one ever, and I need to get it all out while I still can. We approached the gates at dawn, all 10 of us walking openly down the main road like we had nothing to hide. We expected gunfire or arrest or some kind of confrontation, but instead the gates just opened. Guards in clean uniforms stood there watching us, not hostile, almost welcoming. They told us to follow them for processing, said it like we were checking into a hotel instead of infiltrating what we thought was enemy territory. They took our weapons, and we let them, because what choice did we have? And they led us through checkpoints and scanners and medical stations. The city beyond the gates was impossible. Streets that looked like they'd been maintained every single day since the collapse. Buildings with glass windows that weren't broken. Parks with actual grass growing in them. Trees that looked healthy and green. People everywhere. Thousands of them, walking to work or shopping at markets or sitting at outdoor cafes like the world had never ended. They looked clean and fed and calm, nobody with that haunted, desperate look you see in the wasteland. It was like stepping back in time to before everything fell apart. They separated us after processing, gave each of us a room in different residential sectors. They said we'd be evaluated over the next few days, that we'd meet with counselors who'd help us integrate into the community. The word integrate made my skin crawl, but I played along. I had to find Hannah first, had to know she was really here before I did anything else. They gave me clean clothes and a meal that was actually hot, actual vegetables I hadn't seen in years, and it would have felt like paradise if I didn't know what it cost. On the second day, they took me to a residential building in the northern sector and told me someone wanted to see me. I walked into a small apartment with furniture that matched and lights that worked with a switch, and there she was. Hannah, standing by the window looking out at the city, and when she turned around I almost didn't recognize her. She looked healthy, rested, her hair clean and cut, wearing clothes that fit properly. She looked like she belonged here. That's what scared me most. We held each other for a long time, neither of us saying anything, and I kept waiting for her to whisper that it was an act, that she was playing along until we could escape. But when we finally pulled apart and I looked in her eyes, I saw something I didn't want to see. She was happy. Genuinely, actually happy. She asked me how I was, said she'd been worried when she heard I ran from Haven 9, said she hoped I'd eventually find my way here like she did. Like she did. Not like they brought her here, like she came willingly. Hannah explained everything while I sat there feeling my world collapse again. She told me that 3 months ago at Haven 9, she'd been brought before Victor Rains after she'd gathered all her evidence. She thought they'd dispose of her like the others, but instead they offered her a choice. They showed her proof that Site Prime existed, showed her videos of the city, explained what the protocol was really about. Then they asked if she wanted to stay in Haven 9 following rules she didn't believe in, or come here and see for herself whether the new world they were building was worth the cost. She chose to come here. They didn't force her, didn't drug her, didn't condition her. They just showed her what was possible and let her decide. Hannah spent a month in what they called behavioral assessment, which she admitted was partly about making sure she wouldn't be disruptive, but mostly about helping her understand the philosophy behind everything. Then they gave her a job as a data analyst, gave her an apartment, gave her a life that actually felt like living instead of just surviving. I asked her about the people who got disposed of, about Aaron Pike and all the others who disappeared. Hannah looked away when she answered. She said yes, people who couldn't adapt, who would have undermined the stability of Site Prime, they were removed. Removed, not killed, that's the word she used. She said they were given the same choice she got, and if they refused, they were exiled to the Wasteland. Some of them died out there. Some of them probably survived and are still out there somewhere. But they made their choice, and Hannah said she'd made hers. I asked about the empty graves at Haven 9. She explained that the wardens needed people to believe there was a penalty for breaking the rules, needed the fear to maintain order during the screening process. The graves were theater, yes, but effective theater. She said the colonies weren't prisons, they were training grounds. Testing people, preparing them, teaching them how to function in a structured society without constant questioning and resistance. The people who learned that lesson got to come here. The people who didn't, well, natural selection. Hearing my sister talk like that, using their language, accepting their justification, it was worse than finding her dead would have been. I asked her point blank if she thought all of it was worth it, the lies and the manipulation and the deaths. Hannah looked at me with this sad patience like I was a child who didn't understand the world. She said out in the wasteland we were barely surviving, scared every day, watching people die from hunger and disease and violence. Here people have medicine and education and safety. Here children grow up without trauma. Here humanity has a future. She asked me what I thought that was worth. On day 5, Victor Raines himself came to see me. Without the gas mask, he looked ordinary, just a middle-aged man with tired eyes who talked in this measured, reasonable way that made everything sound sensible. He told me the same thing he'd probably told Hannah and countless others. The old world failed. It failed because too many people pulled in too many directions, because there was no unified vision, because individual desires were prioritized over collective survival. The protocol was designed to fix that, to create a society where everyone understood their role and accepted it without endless debate and conflict. He said the collection sites screened for people with the psychological flexibility to thrive in a structured environment. The rules tested compliance, yes, but also trust and community bonding and the ability to defer to authority when necessary. Modern civilization required those traits. The people who passed the screening weren't broken or brainwashed. They were simply the ones capable of putting the collective above themselves. That ability, Raines said, was what would save humanity. Then he gave me the same choice Hannah received. I could stay in Site Prime, contribute to building this new world, have access to resources and safety that didn't exist anywhere else. Or I could leave, go back to the Wasteland, live free, and probably die young. He was very clear that it was my choice. Nobody would force me to stay. Nobody would punish me for leaving. The door was always open. That's what the 9th rule meant before they erased it. You are free to leave any time. They erased it not because it was false, but because it was true, and the truth revealed too much about the nature of the test. I spent days talking to the other refugees we'd come with. Some of them decided to stay almost immediately. Isaac Ward found family members here he thought were dead, and he couldn't walk away from them. The comfort was too appealing after years of hardship. Travis Reed saw the workshops and manufacturing facilities and realized he could actually build things here instead of just scrounging and surviving. They weren't coerced. They just looked at the options and made their choice. Nadia Pike was the hardest. She found her daughter Leah alive and well, living with a foster family in the education sector. But Leah had been here for 2 months, had been through their integration program, and she barely seemed to recognize her mother. Not because they'd erased her memory, but because they'd given her stability and routine and the first sense of safety she'd had since the collapse. Leah was happy here. Nadia had to choose between staying in a place that represented everything she'd been running from, or leaving and abandoning her daughter. She chose to stay. What else could she do? Claire Sutton left, Owen Carter left, and 3 others who couldn't stomach the compromise. They walked out through the same gates we'd entered, taking supplies and vehicles that Site Prime provided, because the system didn't need to keep people by force. The comfort kept them. The safety kept them. The knowledge that outside those walls was nothing but struggle and death kept them. The cage worked because it was comfortable enough that most people would never want to leave. I spent my last night in Site Prime walking through the city with Hannah. She showed me the schools where children learned without fear, the hospitals where people got treatment for illnesses that would kill them in the Wasteland, the community centers where families gathered and laughed like life was normal. She showed me what the protocol had built, and I couldn't deny it worked. People here were genuinely better off than anyone outside the walls. That was the horrible truth. The system worked exactly as designed. But it worked by screening out everyone who valued freedom over security, by disposing of or exiling anyone who couldn't be controlled, by building a population selected specifically for their compliance. It was a functioning society purchased with the lives and freedom of everyone who didn't fit their criteria. Hannah asked me if I thought that was evil or just practical. I told her I didn't know anymore, but I knew I couldn't be part of it. On day 49, I walked out of Site Prime. Hannah stood at the gate and watched me go, and I saw tears on her face, but she didn't try to stop me. She'd made her peace with the cost of civilization. I hadn't. Owen and Claire and the others were waiting a few miles out with a truck and supplies. We're heading north now, going to start our own settlement, one where the rules get explained and debated and changed when they need to be. It'll be harder than Site Prime. People will argue and disagree and make mistakes. Some of us will probably die from those mistakes, but at least we'll be free to make them. Here's what I learned inside Site Prime. The real horror isn't that they're controlling people. It's that most people want to be controlled if the control comes with enough comfort. The rules at Haven 9 worked because people chose safety over freedom. The protocol works because it gives people exactly what they're willing to trade their autonomy for. Site Prime is full of happy, healthy people who made a rational choice to give up their independence. I can't even say they're wrong. I just know I can't make that choice. Hannah is alive and she's genuinely okay, and I have to accept that her path and mine are different now. She chose civilization with all its costs. I chose freedom with all its dangers. Neither of us is wrong. We just value different things. Maybe that's the real lesson of the 9th rule. The door is always open. You can leave anytime. But most people won't because the cage is comfortable and the wasteland is hard. And that choice is what makes us human.